This episode of EMS One-Stop is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's lexipol.com. If you follow EMS One, I have now written 3 times, not once, not twice, but 3 times, on the fact that once every 2 weeks in the United States of America, an ambulance is stolen, primarily from hospital, occasionally from scene, and then chaos and all hell breaks loose thereafter. And in the last quarter particularly, and I'll get some comment from Rodney in a second, I've started to see the uptick in police chases, spike strip deployment, crews being in the back of the truck whilst the truck is being stolen, and indeed the aforementioned crashes. And so it's not getting better, it's getting worse by severity. Hello and welcome back to EMS One-Stop. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence. And as we get to the end of the year that has been 2025, it's time to do a little bit of reflection, a little bit of observation of the news, a little bit of prediction for 2026. And to help me along are my partners in crime from the EMSIntel world. And that is Matt Zavadsky and Rodney Dyche. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thanks.
Nice to be here.
I think it's fair to say this is the second annual meeting now of us. And so first things first is, how are you? And how's your year been?
Age before beauty, Rodney.
Wow. Okay. Look, things are great as far as the world of EMS goes. I guess for us, for me personally, it's going well, and really enjoyed participating with the EMSIntel.
You know, Rob,
I know you've not had any downtime at all, right?
yeah, I don't think either of us have, or any of us, I should say. And as we said in one of our last interviews, hyper turbulent times, and the EMSIntel log clearly shows that. Rodney, how many articles are now in that database?
I was just, look, 3,849 as of this morning.
So let's do a recap for those watching. So Rodney, myself, and Matt are part of the team that run EMSIntel.org, which is where and actually let's be generous, where Rodney collects and curates all of the stories of interest around the EMS world. Matt and I then add our kind of weight, balance, and view to these things, and actually are the main disseminators of this information. And what we're collecting are stories around the industry that are of political of note, of financial of note, or operational of note. And Matt and I and others, and many others actually, then use the log to brief, whether it's journalists, whether it's elected officials at any level of the political strata. And so what we're going to do this time round is to sort of go back through the highlights and pick out what's being said. And of course, what's being said is what's happening out there, and then sort of have some conversation. And I think that the final point before I really go to the guys to give us some opinion is that one of the things we found, and this is where EMSIntel came from in the first place, is that where in your local area, you may have a perceived issue where your local elected officials, your board of supervisors, your local reporters even say, this is an issue that's happening to my service and this is terrible. And then we come in and go, actually, no, here's the cross section of the entire EMS society. And this particular issue, whether it's response times, and we'll get on to response times in a second, whether it's survival rates, whether it's funding, is actually a thematic issue across the country. And that's where EMSIntel comes into its own. So I've done a lot of talking there. Matt, I mean, first of all, what do you think the biggest ticket item of the year for us as an EMS profession has been?
Continues to be the economic sustainability. I mean, the fiscal model is broken, and with each year that passes, it gets brokener. And that is now thankfully being addressed by some communities, but for the national associations, the state associations, for the EMTs and paramedics in the street, our number one focus really needs to be on the economic sustainability of these systems, because we are past the breaking point, and the articles in the Intel log continue to show that year in and year out. And we know the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and hoping to have a different outcome. Thank you, Albert Einstein. But we're past the point now of talking about it. We've got to take some kind of action about the finances because it impacts everything else.
So, Rodney, you've been seeing these stories tick in as the years gone by. Matt is not exaggerating. I think, this is definitely a theme we have to discuss and acknowledge, and then there's some root cause to that.
Oh, without doubt, the funding stories are just growing across the country. Some are probably more magnified in certain areas. Pennsylvania has been a hotbed for trying to understand this, maybe a lot in part because of the volunteerism and attracting volunteers, and which ran a more of a shoestring budget, and they're gone, and now we're having to figure out how to fund a paid service. So yeah, it's real. A lot of places having to merge together or trying to figure out how to come up with a consortium, mutual aid policies. It's becoming a big problem.
Matt, develop a scenario for us, if you will. We are any town EMS in any townville, in any town shire, any town state, and things aren't going quite right financially. What sort of trajectory of what would happen to us, particularly, and we see all these stories in the news, whether it's political, whether it's, takeover, etc. Create that scenario for us.
Sure. So the typical scenario is that systems that were able to function without tax subsidy or little tax subsidy, et cetera, as Rodney said, because they're volunteer, low call volume, or even high volume systems, can't do that anymore, right? And we see that in the Intel log for the entire year. So now communities have to make the determination, what is the service level that I am willing to support financially? That opens up great opportunities to look at intelligence from your system. What types of calls, what types of patients, what clinical acuities. And what we're seeing, certainly in the consulting world and in the expert world now, is so many communities are saying, we've built a system based on this model, as Rodney talked about a little while ago before we got on camera, from a 1978 model. What does the 2028 model look like? What should we be delivering? What should be the service level that the community expects? And what's the cost for that so we can make appropriate funding decisions? And Rob, I think you were at one of the last executive innovation sessions where Doug Wolfberg, Shannon Golenick, and I asked the audience, if you were to build an EMS system today for a new country, how different would it look to what the system that you're currently operating in? And oh my gosh, the responses were incredible because literally no one who offered opinions during that session of 300 people in the room said their system should look like it does today in a new model.
Right. And so one of the interesting things I think we've all picked out from the various bits of news that we have seen and that Rodney's brought forward to us is this kind of promise that the wealth of avarice is there for us to take if we change our system model, and the income is going to be remarkable. And it's fair to say, I think the truth so far has not borne that out.
Oh, absolutely. We have yet to see where these promises were made that they've been kept. Not to say they maybe can't get there, but right now it's not there. If you give it to, I'll run it and I'll make you money, and there seems to be hidden costs that pop up, or it's not maybe an understanding. I don't know. It's really bizarre how this is not materializing on those promises.
Rob, it's interesting. We're on breaking news, right? So December 9th, Medicare released the RAND report for the full 4-year cohort of the ground ambulance data cost collection over the weekend. I just finished an analysis of that data, and across every provider type, every urbanicity, every part of the community, the fee-for-service revenue is 50 to 60% below the cost of providing service. So when somebody says to you, I can do this for free on just billing revenue, ask more questions.
Indeed, and that kind of brings us on, and so that there's two sides of this sort of the news stories that we've seen. One is, as I was already sort of started by, we'll take over, we'll do it for wealth of avarice, and then there's the other side where the communities are saying, well, actually, we acknowledge we need to increase our income for our EMS system. And the way that we're going to do that is through taxation, tax levy, or whatever you call it in your locality. And that comes back down to then does the voter believe that this is worth investing in? And actually, it's not always gone the way of, perhaps not even common sense, but gone the way of, no, we're not going to invest in our EMS system, Rodney. And I think you've seen a lot of those stories.
Yes. Iowa has been a big hotbed for county by county in getting the EMS system to be an essential service and then going to the voters and asking for a millage. And they seem to be reasonably successful in Iowa. But I think the contrast for me is in the state of Washington, where in King County, they renewed a multi-year, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion levy for Medic One, and go to the other side of the state in Clarkston, and they denied a levy for EMS. And so it's all over the place. And I have seen one article where the sheriff's department was asking for a millage for the sheriff's department, and that shut off any conversation on the EMS being able to gather additional dollars, maybe because there was a conflict between some other folks. But there's all those dynamics going on in the community, as well as the individual taxpayer not wanting to support or are willing to support, but how that money is getting divided out in the community.
Now, does this come back, Matt, to the fact that some people think EMS should be essential and therefore we shouldn't be paying any more for it?
Well, and I think if you ask John Q. Public at the corner of First and Elm if EMS is an essential service, they would say yes, it is. But the definition of essential service is different from the street level versus the capital level. So in the state capital, essential service designation means that the local community is required to fund it, like fire and police services. So we need to be careful using those terms. Again, and I think Byrony's documentary, Honorable but Broken, highlights that most people think it is an essential service, but statutorily, it is not an essential service. And Rob and Rodney have done a great job in the past illustrating that if you want to get a new tax levy, an increased tax levy, or heck, just general revenue funding from your community, you as the EMS agency need to be A, trusted by your community, and B, demonstrate the need for that service by being transparent, by sharing your costs, by sharing your income, by sharing your clinical outcomes, your other performance measures. Those communities, and we encourage you to go in, look at the log, click on some of those live links to those news articles. In those communities where the EMS systems have run a campaign, a true campaign, perhaps even as a high school student, Rob, those have been generally successful. But when the EMS agency just rests on its laurels and doesn't engage in community education, doesn't run a campaign to approve those increased levies or those new levies, generally they're going to fail because the public doesn't understand, and generally we are anti-tax.
So let's develop two takeaways here. Takeaway one is, what do you say to EMS leaders in the community? And two, what do you say to the constituents in the community?
Well, I think one of the pieces to the constituency is to Matt's point about the cost of the service. It matters not if you're a non-emergency transport system or a full-blown encompassing system or just the emergency side. Just 2 days ago, I saw an article where a person was complaining loudly about the ambulance bill because they only saw it in mileage, and no understanding of the cost of readiness associated with that. And so it was interesting, the comments underneath this article of the actual EMS providers that were jumping on that same bandwagon because they do not understand the cost of these things. And so that's where I would go with that. We got to get everybody involved in it. So go ahead, Matt.
And I think the agencies have to be more transparent and proactive. Publishing monthly reports, quarterly reports, annual reports, meeting with your stakeholders, whether they're elected officials, appointed officials, hospitals, other stakeholders, Rotary clubs, you name it, and telling people what it costs to provide the service, what are your outcomes, performance measures across the board, not just response times, because we're going to talk about that later, but that builds trust. That transparency is what your community deserves and can use to make good funding decisions.
Right. To paraphrase all of that, people, if you don't talk about yourself, somebody else will, and then you don't control the narrative and you can't deliver the actual great work and the good results that you're achieving. And so thank you for that. Matt, pick another category.
Response times.
Ah, there we go. Response times. In the words of Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last. And also a Robism here. You know, this is a classic case of hitting the target and missing the point, Matt.
Yeah, and we all just need to be very honest with our communities that response times are expensive. The shorter that you want your response times, the more money it's going to take to achieve that performance level. And every study that has been done, whether it was last year or 10 years ago, have shown that response times only matter in about 5% of the cases. Okay, get to those 5%, identify them. If you're not doing EMD in your community, shame on you. I was just in a community in Pennsylvania. Rodney was talking about it. And there's a real reticence. And believe it or not, when I spoke with the 911 director for that county, they said, well, there's too much liability in doing EMD. I'm like, really? Have you picked up a newspaper in the last decade? There's more liability in not doing it than in doing it. But really start having frank conversations about expectations with your community. And if they want a 7-minute response time to every call, great. That comes with a price, both in terms of economics and lives. If they want realistic, evidence-based, scientifically driven, and clinically quality assured response times, great. Let's save more lives for both patients and our providers and the public. And by the way, we can reduce a lot of the expenditures.
You mentioned EMD there. I'm just going to nod to California. We had an EMD bill running. It got softened a little bit to PAI, pre-arrival instructions, but I'm delighted to say that the governor has signed off on that, and we will soon be requiring pre-arrival instructions across all of California. It's for those listening, people may go, well, hang on a second, you don't do that as a matter of course? No, we didn't, and we're going to. And so, but I would also wager there are states that also don't have a blanket wide pre-arrival instruction, at least, system that they deliver. So don't assume just because you think it's happening where you are, it's happening elsewhere. It's not. So I'm delighted to talk about that. Going on from response times, of course, that means we're going to, if we are using the red lights and sirens, and please also go back to a lot of the research from Jarvis and Kupas and Zavadsky et al. It's all out there, and we won't labor that too much, but go back and read that. Response times equals speed. Speed equals crashes, Rodney.
Oh, exactly. We have tracked a number of articles over this past 12 months and back involving emergency response and intersections. And it, in most cases, I would say it is 100% preventable. We don't know. It's not clear what necessarily somebody was responding on, but they had the lights and sirens on, reached an intersection, did not clear it, and took out innocent folk. I know people say, well, they had their sirens on, you should have been doing whatever. Today's modern vehicle, you can't hear anything, particularly if you got a radio on. We already know that the distracted driver from the cell phone use or whatever is impeding progress on that. So these crashes are a problem. We've got to do something about getting control of that. And as an industry, and oh, by the way, people steal the ambulances and crash those too. So
don't get me started.
That one, Rodney, because Rob's got a lot to say about that one, right?
Oh boy! Well, let's just close off the crash piece. You're right that we are monitoring. We are seeing that there's a lot of intersection level vehicle contact. Let's just be generous and call it that for a second. It is inevitably responding. One of the things we try and measure is we try and work out where the location was, and actually from the photographs of these that inevitably appear in the newspaper, there's normally a traffic light there which indicates that there was a junction involved. We can't always ascertain if they were on red lights and sirens. We can't always ascertain who was to blame, but inevitably, the fact of the matter is that these vehicles are having collisions at those particular points. When we always thought about EMS at the crossroads, I wasn't thinking about EMS failing to yield,
Literally,
but it's an
you
issue.
know,
And so please,
and
please,
Rob,
please.
just one editorial as we close. We've seen the social media chats, we've seen the comments in these articles where one sector of our profession says, "Well, our sector doesn't have that because we spend a lot of time, energy, and effort on training and driver training and all that sort of stuff." And it's just not true. And the last three crashes that I read from Rodney's report in the last 3 days were all fire department ambulances. In fact, one in Florida this past weekend, the ambulance crashed while responding hot to a call, put somebody in the hospital in critical condition, put the crew in the hospital in critical condition, and the fire truck that responded to the ambulance crash also got hit on the scene, injuring firefighters and wrecking the fire truck.
Mhm.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And of course, move over is another. It's not an area that we tend to collect too much, but of course, there's another uh, issue there with move over. Excuse the pun. I'm going to park it here for the second, and we're going to come back after this message.
Lexipol empowers first responders and public servants to best meet the needs of their residents safely and responsibly. Serving more than 2 million public safety and government professionals in over 8,000 agencies and municipalities, Lexipol offers a range of solutions that includes policies, training, behavioral health resources, news and analysis, and grant assistance services for law enforcement, fire and rescue, EMS, local government, and other agencies dedicated to public safety. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com.
And we're back. And please make sure that you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast or vodcast from. Remember, we are on wherever you get your podcast from, any channel. We're also on YouTube, so you can actually hear and see some of the things that we are talking about. I'm here with Matt and Rodney. We are talking about EMSIntel.org, which is our news tracker where we are collating, curating stories of the EMS industry. We're doing a bit of a year in review, and we had to get a break because the boys put me on my soapbox and I was about to explode, but here we go anyway. If you follow EMS One, I have now written 3 times, not once, not twice, but 3 times, on the fact that once every 2 weeks in the United States of America, an ambulance is stolen, primarily from hospital, occasionally from scene, and then chaos and all hell breaks loose thereafter. And in the last quarter particularly, and I'll get some comment from Rodney in a second, I've started to see the uptick in police chases, spike strip deployment, crews being in the back of the truck whilst the truck is being stolen, and indeed the aforementioned crashes. And so it's not getting better, it's getting worse by severity, Rodney. I mean, please, don't make me write a 4th article.
Yeah, these theft incidents are in almost all cases 100% preventable by an aftermarket device that you can put in your vehicle, probably for $100 or $150. We did see one matter, I think it was today, that was launched through a crew put a patient in the back of the ambulance, apparently had a gun, took them hostage, and then overtook the vehicle, crashed into a lady and according to the article, he got out and shot and killed her. So these incidents are real. This theft piece is mostly preventable, and that gets us right into the violence. Why are people doing whatever they're doing? But I think Matt may have some comment on this.
It is just mind-boggling. And Rob, it's not even an aftermarket. When you buy an ambulance, it comes with this little button on your key fob that locks all the outside doors, if not the compartments, but certainly the cab and the back door. And this is just laziness on the part of the crew, which then means it's a lack of attention on the part of that agency leadership. And if an ambulance gets stolen because a crew left it open in the ER, or the crew left it open on the scene of a call, then the crew involved and the direct supervisor of that crew should be immediately terminated. And once we start taking this seriously, and we're putting the public's lives at risk by doing this, and I'm not going to go into the what ifs, but absolutely 100% preventable. And if you're CAS accredited, kudos to you. One of the things that CAS site evaluators come and they do is they respond to calls where crews are on scenes, and the first thing they do is check to see if the ambulance is locked, because that is a best practice, and you can't get accredited if the site visitors show up on the scene of a call or in the ER and can pull a handle on your driver's door and open the door. You're done. You're not going to get accredited. That's how serious we need to make this.
So two serious notes actually, and then I'm going to sort of close this section off and move on. One is I've started to now look into. So I do have a fourth article, I think, and it's because I've started to do the research of where people are litigating, suing, taking action against the individual, the ambulance, whoever that crashed into their property or whatever, and actually because it was stolen, right? And so therefore there's a legal risk there, and perhaps this is something for you to take back to Stephen, Doug, and Ryan, perhaps, because that's happening. But fast forward to an email that dropped in yesterday, DEA's rules about EMS systems and the drugs they hold. Right. Imagine this in the report. What DEA to ambulance company? What do you mean the container containing our drugs was left unlocked?
Right.
Boom.
Right.
There goes your license, people. Just saying. Oh, anyway, so I'm going to get off that soapbox, but I suspect, sadly, I'm going to be back on it sometime soon. Well, theoretically, in 2 weeks' time, when the next one is stolen. Please lock it up. Back to you, Rodney, for a topic.
Well, I think that staffing is a topic that remains relevant, but one of the things that I would note is the number of stories around staffing seemed to have decreased from 2024 side. It's not clear to me that our staffing is better. It may be that we're just not talking about it as much. I can say that there are a number of articles out where there were earn to learn type programs, and it's not clear to me how many thousands and upon thousands of new providers are in a system across the country, and not sure the impact of the clinical wisdom in these communities that they have put 300 or 400 people into a community with little or no experience.
I think, first of all, before I go to Matt, that the recent AAA report says there is a subtle uptick in recruitment. Check. Matt and I recently were on tour on the East Coast, and the services we visited said that things are on the up, particularly around EMTs and the earn to learn classes and the people they're bringing in. So we've started to see some examples of this. Matt, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that, but also more importantly, because of system transformations, we're seeing an evolution to tiered deployment.
Right.
And we're seeing an uptick in the number of EMTs that are being brought into these communities. We look at the AIM High organizations, those high performance EMS systems across North America, and all of them have now switched to tiered deployment. Many systems, because they're going to tiered deployment, don't need to have as many paramedics on staff. And let's face it, paramedics are the ones that are a lot harder to employ and to keep employed. So I think part of what we're seeing, especially even in the earn to learn programs that you talked about, is more staffing at the EMT level, which can handle 70% of the calls in most cases, and that realization in the community. And oh my gosh, once you do that, your staffing issues become less pronounced because you don't have to retain $30, $40, $50 an hour paramedics at the reimbursement that we're getting. And you're using EMTs who are great, and they do a great job on 70% of the calls. You keep your paramedics for the calls that you need paramedics, vis-a-vis the Medic One program in Seattle that Rodney was talking about. Mm-hmm. And that could be a factor as well. Finally, some realization that tiered deployment is the way to go.
But that also comes down to the way that you design your system, and therefore you back that out. That's the way that you get your locally elected officials to accept the new system design. back out, and so there's a kind of a whole reverse triage here of things, and also the fact you need to have triage. You need to have a system that is able to discern the level of acuity of the patient and then work out which resource you send. So it requires a degree of system design and indeed political understanding, because here comes those three little words, all in favor. You have to have someone to vote for you to get these things done. But there's a whole everything is related here.
Yep.
All right, Matt, I'm going to get you to pick a topic from the wheel of EMS media.
Gosh, let's see. I think we've touched on the vast majority of them. I think outcomes publishing performance metrics that matter is probably the one that we need to touch on before we close, because I still see way too often people are evaluating EMS systems based on metrics that don't matter, but yet when you ask them about the metrics that do, those NEMSQA measures that all of us are part of and love, very few people are monitoring or measuring or reporting the clinical measures that make all the difference in the world, way more difference than whether you got there in 10 minutes or 20 minutes.
I don't disagree. Response times are used as a cudgel. You're not doing it, so therefore I should, and we don't know what the clinical outcomes are in a lot of matters where it could be demonstrated. I've seen some systems where the old school, if you will, of airway management, just as an example, and you have a lot of let's say well-seasoned paramedics that want to provide oral intubation, when we now know we can deal with an airway via bag valve. And so the argument then ensues, and you've now got an elected board that's going to make a decision on whether somebody should be your contractor, and all they know are these advanced skills, and that's they end up a lot of times saying, well, that's what we want. So I agree. The QA piece, demonstrating your worth in the community based upon the level of protocol that you provide.
And we can drive that. And I think one of the best examples of that is our good friend Colby Miller with MedStar Ambulance in Michigan. He has now started all of his quarterly reports that he gives to the city councils and to those that he contracts with, starting with all their clinical metrics. And the response times are almost like a sub-bullet, near the end of the presentation, because he focuses on the things that matter: patient experience, clinical outcomes, and that if we all do that, we'd be in a much better position. And our communities would too.
Right. And actually, if you want an example of how to be transparent, this is not a US example, but just go and look up Jason Killens, who's the chief executive of the London Ambulance Service in the UK, the largest ambulance service. Probably, I mean, it mirrors New York and LA in terms of size and complexity. But every week, Jason gets on camera to everybody, and it's public, to talk about the issues, to talk about the operational things, and everyone can see it, and it's totally transparent. And I think everyone should do that. And so, shout out to Jason Killens over there in London. We're watching you too, and I think what you're doing is very, very transparent. And thank you for doing it. And there's an example. Before we go, usual question: anything I've forgotten to ask, or anything you need to tell us? But actually, just reflect forward. We've kind of had a little bit of woe is me, because that's how things make the news. But actually, pick out a highlight and something we've got to look forward to going forward. Matt Zavadsky.
Honest conversations. Communities are really reevaluating their system level based on affordability and clinical need. At least once a day, I'm getting an email, phone call from some community saying, holy crap, we can't afford this anymore. What's our next step? Seize that opportunity, be realistic, change the expectations for your sustainability and for your employees' well-being.
Thank you. Rodney.
I mirror everything that Matt just said about that. We've seen a number of articles coming through this past year under the data and planning mode, where people are looking in these communities. And that's what I think is going to have to happen above all else, because we've seen the federal funding get adjusted. We've got other pressures on that side. And so having a thoughtful conversation about what your system needs to look like on the go forward is paramount, because we can't have any more of this. Well, we didn't like that. So we just want to do this. Is that even sustainable? So having that community conversation.
Great, thank you. Well, let's just do another plug for EMSIntel.org. It is a system where you can search by category for the story that you're looking for, to get some moral support, to get some evidence, to get an idea of what's happening out there. So please do refer to that. We'll continue to bring you EMSIntel.org and the stories, and obviously offering our analysis as the years go by and as the months go by. So we're always going to be there. And our thanks to the American Analysts Association and to Aim High for sponsoring Intel, enabling us and giving us the platform, literally the technical platform, to actually collect and collate all of this stuff. So a shout out to them. And here's to a great 2026. And guys, I hope you will be back sometime soon to continue the commentary.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So that was EMSIntel.org. It was our second annual assessment of what's happening out there in the news. We have a great 2026, a busy 2026 to look forward to. Not so much news, but one of the big things coming up early in January of 26 is NEMSP's annual meeting, where I know there will be rooms full of posters and research and data and ideas to also help us go forward into the year as well. So I'm looking forward to that. That was another edition of EMS One-Stop. Please make sure that you like and subscribe. Thank you to Matt and to Rodney. And until next time, bye for now.